like a fair. A pouch hung from the scuffed leather belt clasped around his waist. Above his white beard, a proud eagle nose hooked over his mouth and dominated his face. He peered at Eragon with deep-set eyes, shadowed by a gnarled brow, and waited for his reply. To get information, Eragon said, Roran is getting a chisel fixed, and I had free time, so I came to see if you could answer a few questions. The old man grunted and reached for the door. Eragon noticed a gold ring on his right hand. Light glinted off the sapphire, highlighting a strange symbol carved on its face. You might as well come in. We'll be talking a while. Your questions never seem to end. Inside the house was darker than charcoal. An acrid smell heavy in the air. Now for a light. Eragon heard the old man move around, then a low curse as something crashed on the floor. Ah, here we go. A white spark flashed, a flame wavered into existence. Brom stood with a candle before the stone fireplace. Stacks of books surrounded a high-backed, deeply carved wooden chair that faced the mantel. The forelegs were shaped like eagle claws, and the seat and back were padded with leather embroidered with a swirling rose pattern. A cluster of lesser chairs held piles of scrolls. Ink pots and pens were scattered across a writing desk. Make room for yourself. But by the lost kings, be careful. This stuff is valuable. Eragon stepped over pages of parchment covered with angular runes. He gently lifted cracking scrolls off a chair and placed them on the floor. A cloud of dust flew into the air as he sat. He stifled a sneeze. Brom bent down and lit the fire with his candle. Good. Nothing like sitting by a fire for conversation. He threw back his hood to reveal hair that was not white but silver, then hung a kettle over the flames and settled into the high-backed chair. Now, what do you want? He addressed Eragon roughly, but not unkindly. Well, said Eragon, wondering how best to approach the subject. I keep hearing about the Dragon Riders and their supposed accomplishments. Most everyone seems to want them to return, but I've never heard tell of how they were started, where the dragons came from, or what made a rider special, aside from dragons. A vast subject to tell about, grumbled Brom. He peered at Eragon's alertly. If I told you the whole story, we would still be sitting here when winter comes again. It will have to be reduced to the manageable length. But before we start properly, I need my pipe. Eragon waited patiently as Brom tamped down his tobacco. He liked Brom. The old man was irascible at times, but he never seemed to mind taking time for Eragon. Eragon had once asked him where he came from, and Brom had laughed, saying, a village much like Carvajal, only not quite as interesting. Curiosity aroused Eragon. Eragon asked his uncle, but Garrow could only tell him that Brom had bought a house in Carvajal nearly 15 years ago, and had lived there quietly ever since. Brom used a tinderbox to light the pipe. He puffed a few times, then said, there. We won't have to stop except for tea. Now about the riders, or the Shurtagal, as they were called by the elves. Where to start? They spanned countless years at the height of their powers, held sway over twice the Empire's lands. Numerous stories have been told about them, most nonsense. If you believed everything said, you would expect them to have the powers of a lesser god. Scholars have devoted entire lives to separating these fictions from fact, but it's doubtful any of them will succeed. However, it is an impossible task. If we confine ourselves to the three eras you specified, how the writers began, why they were so highly regarded, and where dragons came from, I shall start with the last item. Eragon settled back and listened to the man's mesmerizing voice. Dragons have no beginning, unless it lies with the creation of Algasia itself. And if they have an end, it will be when the world perishes, for they suffer as the land does. They, the dwarves, and a few others, are the true inhabitants of this land. They lived here before all others, strong and proud in their elemental glory. Their world was unchanging until the first elves sailed over the sea on their silver ships. Where did the elves come from? Interrupted Eragon. And why are they called the fair folk? Do they really exist? Brom scowled. Do you want your original questions answered or not? They won't be if you want to explore every obscure piece of knowledge. Sorry, said Eragon. He dipped his head and tried to look contrite. No, you're not, said Brom, with some amusement. He shifted his gaze to the fire and watched it lick the underside of the kettle. If you must know, elves are not legends, and they are called the fair folk because they are more graceful than any of the other races. They come from what they call a Layla, though none but they know what or even where it is. Now, he glared from under his bushy eyebrows to make sure there would be no more interruptions. The elves were a proud race, then and strong in magic. At first they regarded dragons as mere animals. From that belief rose a deadly mistake. A brash elven youth hunted down a dragon as he would a stag and killed it. Outraged, the dragons ambushed and slaughtered the elf. Unfortunately, the bloodletting did not stop there. The dragons massed together and attacked the entire elven nation, dismayed by a terrible misunderstanding. The elves tried to end the hostilities, but couldn't find a way to communicate with the dragons. Thus, to greatly abbreviate a complicated series of occurrences, there was a very long and very bloody war, which both sides later regretted. At the beginning, the elves fought only to defend themselves, for they were reluctant to escalate the fighting. But the dragon's ferocities eventually forced them to attack for their own survival. This lasted for 5 years and would have continued for much longer if an elf called Eragon hadn't found a dragon egg. Eragon blinked in surprise. Ah, I see you didn't know of your namesake, said Brom. No. The tea kettle whistled stridently. Why was I named after an elf? Then you should find this all the more interesting, said Brom. He hooked the kettle out of the fire and poured boiling water into 2 cups. Handing one to Eragon, he warned, "These leaves don't need to steep long, so drink it quickly before it gets too strong." Eragon tried a sip, but scalded his tongue. Brom set his own cup aside and continued smoking the pipe. No one knows why that egg was abandoned. Some say the parents were killed in an elven attack. Others believe the dragons purposefully left it there. Either way, Eragon saw the value of raising a friendly dragon. He cared for it secretly. In the custom of the ancient language, named it Bidom. When Bidom had grown to a good size, they traveled together among the dragons and convinced them to live in peace with the elves. Treaties were formed between the two races. To ensure that war would never break out again, they decided that it was necessary to establish the riders. At first, the riders were intended merely as a means to communicate between elves and dragons. However, as time passed, their worth was recognized, and they were given even more authority. Eventually, they took the island Rengard for their home and built a city on it, Duar Aroba. Before Galbatorix overthrew them, the riders held more power than all the kings in Algasia. Now, I believe I have answered 2 of your questions. Yes, said Eragon absently. It seemed like an incredible coincidence that he had been named after the first rider. For some reason, his name did not feel the same anymore. What does Eragon mean? I don't know, said Brom. It's very old. I doubt anyone remembers, except the elves. And Fortune would have to smile greatly before you talked with one. It is a good name to have, though. You should be proud of it. Not everyone has one so honorable. Eragon brushed the matter from his mind and focused on what he had learned from Brom. There was something missing. I don't understand. Where were we when the riders were created? We? Asked Brom, raising the eyebrows. You know, all of us. Eragon waved his hands vaguely. Humans in general. Brom laughed. We are no more native to this land than the elves. It took our ancestors another 3 centuries to arrive here and join the riders. That can't be, protested Eragon. We've always lived in the Pelcanor Valley. That might be true for a few generations, but beyond that, no. It isn't even true for you, Eragon, said Brom gently. Though you consider yourself a part of Garrow's family, and rightly so, your sire was not from here. Ask around, and you'll find many people who haven't been here that long. This valley is old and hasn't always belonged to us. Eragon scowled and gulped at the tea. It was still hot enough to burn his throat. This was his home, regardless of who his father was. What happened to the dwarves after the riders were destroyed? No one really knows. They fought with the riders through the first few battles, but when it came clear Galbatorix was going to win, they sealed all the known entrances to their tunnels and disappeared underground. As far as I know, not one has been seen since. And the dragons, he asked? What about them? Surely they weren't all killed. Brom answered sorrowfully. That is the greatest mystery in Algasia nowadays. How many dragons survived Galbatorix's murderous slaughter? He spared those who agreed to serve him, but only the twisted dragons of the Forsworn would assist his madness. If any dragons aside from Shuriken are still alive, they have hidden themselves, so they will never be found by the Empire. So where did my dragon come from? Wondered Eragon. Were the Urgles here when the elves came to Algasia? He asked. No, they followed the elves across the sea, like ticks seeking blood. They were one of the reasons the riders became valued for their battle prowess and ability to keep the peace. Much can be learned from the history. It's a pity the king makes it a delicate subject, reflected Brom. Yes, I heard your story the last time I was in town. Story? Roared Brom. Lightning flashed in his eyes. If it is a story, then the rumors of my death are true, and you are speaking with a ghost. Respect the past. You never know how it may affect you. Eragon waited until Brom's face mellowed before he dared ask, how big were the dragons? A dark plume of smoke swirled above Brom like a miniature thunderstorm, larger than a horse. Even the small ones had wingspans over 100 feet. They never stopped growing. Some of the ancient ones, before the Empire killed them, could have passed as large hills. Dismay swept through Eragon. How can I hide my dragon in the years to come? He raged silently, but kept his voice calm. When did they mature? Well, said Brom, scratching his chin. They couldn't breathe fire until they were around 5 to 6 months old, which is about when they could mate. The older a dragon was, the longer it could breathe fire. Some of them could keep it up for a minute. Brom blew a smoke ring and watched it float up to the ceiling. I heard that their scales shone like gems. Brom leaned forward and growled. You heard right. They came in every color and shade. It was said that a group of them looked like a living rainbow, constantly shifting and shimmering. But who told you that? Eragon froze for a second and lied. A traitor. What was his name? Asked Brom. His tangled eyebrows met in a thick white line. The wrinkles deepened on his forehead. Unnoticed, the pipe smoldering out. Eragon pretended to think. I don't know. He was talking in Lorne's, but I never found out who he was. I wish you had, muttered Brom. He also said a rider could hear his dragon's thoughts, said Eragon quickly, hoping that the fictitious traitor would protect him from suspicion. Brom's eyes narrowed. Slowly he took out a tinderbox and struck the flint. Smoke rose, and he took a long puff from the pipe, exhaling slowly in the flat voice and said, he was wrong. It isn't in any of the stories, and I know them all. Did he say anything else? Eragon shrugged. No, Brom was too interested in the traitor for him to continue the falsehood. Casually, he inquired, did dragons live very long? Brom did not respond at once. His chin sank to his chest while his fingers tapped the pipe thoughtfully, light reflecting off his ring. Sorry, my mind was elsewhere. Yes, a dragon will live for quite a while, forever in fact, as long as it isn't killed and its rider doesn't die. How does anyone know that? Objected Eragon. If dragons die when the riders do, they could only live to be 60 or 70. You said during your narration that riders lived for hundreds of years, but that's impossible. It troubled him to think of outliving his family and friends. A quiet smile curled Brom's lip, and he said slyly, what is possible is subjective. Some would say that you can't travel through the spine and live, yet you do. It's a matter of perspective. You must be very wise to know so much at such a young age. Eragon flushed, and the old man chuckled. Don't be angry. You can't be expected to know such things. You forget that dragons were magical. They affected everything around them in strange ways. The riders were closest to them and experienced this the most. The most common side effect was extended life. Our king has lived long enough to make that apparent, but most people attribute it to his own magical attributes. There were also other, less noticeable changes. All the riders were stronger of body, keener of mind, and truer of sight than normal men. Along with this, a human rider would slowly acquire pointed ears, though they were never prominent as an elf's. Eragon had to stop his hand from reaching to feel the tips of his ears. How else will his dragon change my life? Not only has it gotten inside my head, but it's altering my body as well. Were dragons very smart? Didn't you pay attention to what I told you earlier? Demanded Brom. How could the elves form agreements and peace treaties with dumb brutes? They were as intelligent as you or I, but they were animals, persisted Eragon. Brom snorted. They were no mere animals. They were no more animal than we are. For some reason, people praised everything the riders did, yet ignored the dragons, assuming that they were nothing more than an exotic means to get from one town to another. They weren't. The riders' great deeds were only possible because of the dragons. How many men would draw their swords if they knew a giant fire-breathing lizard, one with more natural cunning and wisdom than even a king could hope for, would soon be there to stop the violence? He blew another smoke ring and watched it waft away. Did you ever see one? Nay, said Brom. It was long before my time. And now, for a name. I've been trying to recall the name of a certain dragon, but it keeps eluding me. I think I heard it when the traders were in Carvajal, but I'm not sure. Could you help me? Brom shrugged and quickly listed a stream of names. There was Jorah, Hurador, and Fundor, who fought the great sea snake, Galzra, Bram, and Ohem the strong, Gritim, Eragon, and Rolzard. He added many others, and at the very end he uttered so softly Eragon almost did not hear, and Saphira. Brom quietly emptied his pipe. Was it about those? I'm afraid not, said Eragon. Brom had given him much to think about, and it was getting late. Well, Roran's probably finished with Horst. I should get back, though I'd rather not. Brom raised an eyebrow. What? Is that it? I expected to answer your questions until he came looking for you. No queries about dragon battle tactics, or a quest of descriptions of breathtaking aerial combat? Are you done? For now, laughed Eragon. I learned what I wanted to and more. He stood and Brom followed. Very well then. He ushered Eragon to the door. Goodbye. Take care and don't forget. If you remember who the traitor was, tell me. I will. Thank you. Eragon stepped into the glaring winter sunlight. Squinting, he slowly paced out, pondering what he had heard. On the way home, Roran said, there was a stranger from Theron's Ford at Horses today. What's his name? Asked Eragon. He sidestepped a patch of ice and continued walking at a brisk pace. His cheeks and eyes burned from the cold. Dempton, he came here to have horse forge him some sockets, said Ron. His stocky legs prowled through a drift, clearing the way for eragon. Doesn't Thornsform have its own smith? Yes, replied Ron. But he isn't skilled enough. He glanced at eragon with a shrug and added, Dempton needs the sockets for his mill. He's expanding it and offered me a job. If I accept it, I'll leave with him when he picks up the sockets. Millers worked all year. During winter, they ground whatever people brought them. But in harvest season, they brought grain and sold it as flour. It was hard, dangerous work. Workers often lost fingers and hands to the giant millstones. Are you going to tell Garo? Asked eragon. Yes. A grimly amused smile played across Rowan's face. What for? You know what he thinks about us going away. It'll only cause trouble if you say anything. Forget about it, so we can eat tonight's dinner in peace. I can't. I'm going to take the job. eragon halted. Why? They faced each other, their breath visible in the air. I know money is hard to come by, but we always manage to survive. You don't have to leave. No, I don't, but the money is for myself. Roran tried to resume walking with him, but eragon refused to budge. What do you need it for? He demanded. Roran's shoulders straightened slightly. I want to marry. Bewilderment and astonishment overwhelmed eragon. He remembered seeing Katrina and Roran kissing during the trader's visit. But marriage? Katrina? He asked weakly. Just to confirm, Roran nodded. Have you asked her? Not yet. But come spring, when I can raise a house, I will. There's too much work on the farm for you to leave now, protested eragon. Wait until you're ready for planting. No, said Ron, laughing slightly. Spring's the time I'll be needed the most. The grounds will have to be furrowed and sown. The crops must be weeded, not to mention all the other chores. No, this is the best time for me to go. When all we really do is wait for the seasons to change, you and Garo can make do without me. If all goes well, I'll soon be back working on the farm with a wife. eragon reluctantly conceded that Roran made sense. He shook his head, but whether with amazement or anger, he knew not. I guess I can only wish you the best of luck, but Garo may take this with ill humor. We will see. They resumed walking, the silence and barrier between them. eragon's heart was disturbed. It would take time before he could look upon his development with favor. When they arrived home, Roran did not tell Garo of his plans, but eragon was sure that he soon would. eragon went to see the dragon for the first time since it had spoken to him. He approached apprehensively, aware now that it was equal. Eragon, is that all you can say? He snapped. Yes. His eyes widened at the unexpected reply. And he sat down roughly. Now has a sense of humor. What next? Impulsively, he broke a dead branch with his foot. Roran's announcement had put him in a foul mood. A questioning thought came from the dragon. So he told it what had happened. As he talked, his voice grew steadily louder, until he was yelling pointlessly into the air. He ranted until his emotions were spent, then ineffectually punched the ground. I don't want him to go. That's all, he said helplessly. The dragon watched impassively, listening and learning. Eragon mumbled a few choice curses and rubbed his eyes. He looked at the dragon thoughtfully. You need a name. I heard some interesting ones today. Perhaps you'll like one. He mentally ran through the list Brom had given him until he found two names that struck him as heroic, noble, and pleasing to the ear. What did you think of Manala or his successor, Iridor? Both were great dragons. No, said the dragon. It sounded amused with his efforts. Eragon, that's my name. You can't have it, he said, rubbing his chin. Well, if you don't like those, there are others. He continued through the list, but the dragon rejected every one he proposed. It seemed to be laughing at something Eragon did not understand, but he ignored it and kept suggesting names. There is Ingothord. He slew. A revelation stopped him. That's the problem. I've been choosing male names. You are a she. Yes, the dragon folded her wings smugly. Now that he knew what to look for, he came up with half a dozen names. He toyed with Miramel, but that did not fit. After all, that was the name of a brown dragon. Ophelia and Lenora were also discarded. He was about to give up, and he remembered the last name Brom had muttered. Eragon liked it. But with the dragon, he asked, Are you Saphira? She looked at him with intelligent eyes. Deep in his mind, he felt her satisfaction. Yes. Something clicked in his head, and her voice echoed as if from a great distance. He grinned in response. Saphira started humming.